We're here today to continue our committee's work securing our critical mineral supply chains and countering the People's Republic of China's control over so many of the materials which have become essential to our modern lives. Just after the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law and on the heels of Putin's invasion of Ukraine, this committee held a series of hearings on critical minerals in early 2022. We recognize the growing risk of our country's reliance on nations who do not share our values for minerals. Just like Putin weaponized Russia's oil and gas resources to try to scare off Europe from supporting Ukraine, Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party are more than willing to use critical minerals as leverage to put Americans and the free world at risk. In fact, China is already doing so. Just last month, Xi Jinping's government announced export restrictions on gallium and germanium, two critical minerals that are needed for semiconductor fabrication. This is just a small preview of what could come in the future, and some of the decisions that the administration has been making seems to be increasing our risk instead of reducing it. That is why it is so important for Congress has made progress to strengthen supply chains and onshore vital manufacturing, including through the Inflation Reduction Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, CHIPS and Science and National Defense Authorization Acts. However, our work is still not done. I want to thank my dear friend Dan Yergin, who I'm grateful to have testifying before us today, will help us better understand how the global landscape for critical minerals has changed in the wake of those legislative efforts. Dr. Yergin and his team have done extensive study of the supply and demand outlook for copper, lithium, cobalt, and nickel, including a focus on opportunities to produce these resources domestically, as well as with our free trade partners. It will come as no surprise that I want to discuss our best options to pivot away from China, particularly when it comes to the electric vehicle supply chain. Let me be clear. I fully support realistic and responsible approaches to reducing emissions in the transportation sector, and EVs are an important part of that equation. But so long as China and other countries who don't share our values control the supply of critical minerals required for EVs, I will strongly oppose moving too quickly toward an EV-dominated future. Thanks to innovation and investment in our domestic oil industry over the last 2 decades, there is no longer a risk that foreign adversaries could force us to ration gasoline like we saw in the 70s. We must deploy the same innovative spirit and entrepreneurship to ensure that no American has to wait in line for the ration of Chinese battery. The chart behind me shows just how dire the threat is. Which one we have up? When it comes to EV battery supply chain, depending on the mineral, China and Chinese-controlled entities and countries like Indonesia process anywhere from 60 to 100% of all the minerals needed for batteries and electric motors. And their dominance is not just in minerals, it's also in battery manufacturing. China is responsible for 74% of the world's cathode production, 92% of anode production, and 76% of lithium-ion battery cell production. They simply have cornered the market. With numbers like these, it is frustrating that the administration continues to try to water down the sourcing requirements for EV batteries clearly stated, and I say clearly stated because we wrote it out in the IRA. This is what the administration is administering to try to get more out quicker and be more dependent on China than we already are. They're reducing. In 2023, the bill stated you had to have 40% from the U.S. or free trade countries. They cut that down to 20, in half. Again, in 2024, it goes to 50. They kept that at 20. 2025, 60. They kept that at 30. 26, cut it in half from 70 to 35. You can see the trend. This is what you hear me complain about all the time. They're trying to administer a piece of legislation they never passed. And I'm just waiting for them to get out of the, what do we have? What are they in right now? What cycle? The interim. Huh? Yeah, they're an interim as far as they haven't filed the final rules. They're operating under the interim right now because we can't sue them. As soon as they go into their final ruling, there will be somebody damaged. They can sue. We'll do an amicus brief and stop this craziness. This is what I'm dealing with. So when people say, why are you upset about your bill? The bill is well balanced. We're producing more energy than ever before. We're producing more energy in this country than ever before. And we can do the same with minerals that we haven't even touched yet. So with numbers like these, it's frustrating that the administration continues to try to water down the sourcing requirements for EV batteries, clearly stated in the IRA. Through guidance, the administration is attempting to cut the critical mineral sourcing percentage requirements in half, as we just showed you, pretending battery component manufacturing is the same as critical minerals processing, and proposing fake free trade agreements that circumvent the law. And the administration still has not published a foreign entity of concern, guidance required to in the IRA to prevent bad actors from receiving taxpayer dollars. The chart, as we said, a stark difference behind me was between the strong critical mineral sourcing requirements explicitly spelled out in Section 13401 of the IRA and Treasury's attempt to lower the bar through guidance. As you can see, Treasury is effectively cutting the requirements in half, making it harder to secure the supply chain here at home and with our partners. The administration appears to care more about getting EVs on the road than our energy security and competition with China. With so many of our mineral resources on federal lands, I appreciate Deputy Secretary Boudreau joining us to discuss the Interior Department's role as part of the solution. While Congress has given the administration tools to secure our supply chain in recent legislation, I'm incredibly frustrated that the bipartisan demand for urgency seems to be going unheard. Benchmark mineral intelligence estimates that at least 336 new mines are needed for graphite, lithium, nickel, and cobalt to meet EV demands prior to 2035. However, an insufficient number of new mines are currently in development to meet that demand, while those projects that are under development face long time frames and considerable risk. When we refuse to allow mining and processing here in timely fashion, we encourage it to occur in countries with lower environmental and labor standards than we were permitted at home. No one in the administration or Congress denies this reality. Personally, I've been speaking to members in the Congo who are basically being exploited, and they are desperately in need of changing how they do business there, and China having a stranglehold on them. And they're willing to fight, but it's going to be very hard. But we haven't seen any major projects approved by the U.S. Forest Service or the Department of Interior at any point during this administration. What we have seen is environmental impact statements for mineral projects rescinded to undergo years of additional review and consultation with no end in sight. Other projects, including one that has received Defense Production Act funding so that the Department of Defense can manufacture desperately needed ammunition, have seen their schedules slip over and over again. And we've heard troubling reports that Department of Energy grant funding is being withheld for mineral processing that would enable new mining, while recycling projects already have their cash in hand. Not only has the administration delayed the minerals projects that we need, they appear to be taking the position that we don't have a permitting problem at all for critical minerals. The bipartisan infrastructure law directed the Department of Interior to make critical mineral permitting improvements and then report back to Congress within 1 year on progress and additional recommendations. But instead of getting the report, the law requires the report we received earlier this month, 10 months late, does not describe any concrete actions that have been taken to speed up permitting or establishing timelines as required by the bipartisan infrastructure law. While I do not support the intent of some of the administration's non-permitting recommendations, like reasonable reforms to the mining law of 1872 to ensure a fair return for taxpayers and addressing abandoned hard rock mines, none of that does anything to secure the supply chains for minerals or for the EV batteries that this administration so desperately wants. It's seeming more and more like this administration's strategy is focused on talking about new mining, but doing very little to actually permit and use resources we have beneath our feet. I'm committed to keep working on a bipartisan basis in our committee to correct this course. We must also acknowledge that while we can provide much of the minerals that we need domestically, we can't produce or process every mineral in the quantities that we need here in the United States, or even just in North America. So we need to ensure that we are working with trusted, reliable partners when it comes to overseas mineral sourcing. That means looking to friends like Canada and Australia, free trade partners, and our NATO allies to help us secure our mineral supply chains. But it does not mean ignoring our democratic values, labor standards, or environmental priorities to buy from anyone willing to sell us minerals or batteries. In closing, if we don't address our dependence problem and look for innovative ways to onshore the critical mineral supply chain, it will compromise our energy security and handicap us in a global marketplace. Let me be very clear. The reason the bill was written the way it was, I didn't want to give 75 cents credit to EVs, to the car makers. I think they have a good product, the market will go. That's where the market will take you. But in order to do that, we made a compromise. If we can develop our own supply chain, not dependent on China and areas of the world that we have no values with whatsoever, that can hold them hostage, the same way that Putin has held energy as a hostage and a weapon, then I would be happy to work with you. I tried in good faith to do that. And we have a bill that we all passed, this law passed. It's a good piece of legislation that they do not wish to adhere to because it's not the time frame that they wanted. That's the problem I've got. So I'm going to continue to fight. And we can't let this happen. And with that in mind, I cannot help but take the opportunity with the Deputy Secretary to bring up the Inflation Reduction Act's oil and gas leasing provisions. I've been concerned about the efforts of the administration to throttle back oil and gas leasing and production. So I made sure that the IRA tied Interior's ability to issue wind and solar leases to the department holding significant oil and gas lease sales, both on and offshore, simply stating, you can't go out and do what you want unless you do everything that we need. We're going to basically be able to extract the oil and gas that we need in the properties and basically our BLM land and offshore basically with the Gulf, and do that as we're basically developing the resources that we need for minerals. As we all know, not only are we nearing the end of the fiscal year on September 30th, we are coming up on two major oil and gas deadlines: the release of the long-delayed 5-year offshore leasing program and the Inflation Reduction Act's final mandate, Gulf of Mexico lease sales 261. Unfortunately, as a result of the administration's own actions, they've managed to delay the lease sale 261 until no later than November 8th, according to a recent Fifth Circuit order. Let me review just how ridiculous this is. First, the administration allowed environmental groups to hijack the leasing process by agreeing to a voluntary settlement related to the Rice's well that bypassed Interior's normal procedure and set them up to lose in court. The settlement imposed new restrictions on oil and gas in the Gulf and would have removed 6 million acres from the lease sale. Then, when the federal judge determined Interior's changes to the lease sale were likely unlawful and ordered the sale to proceed as originally proposed, Interior said they did not have enough time to course correct and meet the September 30 deadline set by Congress. Why not? Because according to Interior, they need more time to follow normal procedures, the same procedures that the administration was willing to bypass to appease environmental activists in the settlement agreement. You can't make this crap up. You just can't. It's real. This is just the latest example in which this administration hasn't gotten the message. Trying to rewrite an energy security law passed by Congress through administration action is not a winning strategy, and they're finding out the hard way, and they're delaying everyone's production. I want everyone to know that I will support anyone who suffers damages as a result of this administration failing to implement the IRA in alignment with the intent and the letter of this very balanced law. Because the reality is, we'll get closer to achieving our shared goals, not Republican goals, not Democrat goals, but American goals for oil and gas, for critical minerals, and for many other energy sources, if we embrace the balanced approach in the IRA. As 10 of my Republican colleagues stated in their amicus brief related to the lease sale 261, and I have said this, that bill that was put together, the IRA, was done with all the consideration, working with my partners on the Republican side and Democrat side for over 5 years. The IRA was the result of that considerable deliberation concerning the economic, energy, environmental, and strategic interests of the United States. And the IRA balances diverse, complex, and overlapping considerations, including growth and conservation, domestic needs, and global positioning, and security and diplomacy. That was what my friends said. I couldn't agree more with my Republican friends on this, and I will continue to do everything in my power to ensure the law is implemented in that manner. We're already on track to realize the benefits of these energy laws that we have recently passed. We are producing, as I've said before, more energy of all kinds in 2023. 37 trillion cubic feet of gas will be produced this year, never before. 4.6 billion barrels of oil from the United States, never that much before. And doubling the amount of solar and battery projects, doubling the amount in 1 year, never done before. If we work on a bipartisan basis to implement all the above energy policy established by the IRA and the infrastructure law, that we can build even more on this success. So I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today to understand how we can find a realistic path forward without sacrificing our energy and national security. And with that, I'm going to turn to Ranking Member, my friend, Senator Brasso.
Well, thanks so much, Mr. Chairman, for your very strong statement.